Escazú is for you. We really wanted to have this chat series to break the agreement down and make it real for people. So it was something that people could connect with and understand. Sometimes these international and regional agreements can seem very far away and not relevant to us.
Escazú is for you is brought to you by the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute, or CANARI, and funded by the European Union under CANARI's Pisces project, which the EU is supporting. An adaptation of a live online chat series of the same name hosted by CANARI in November 2020, Escazú is for You is a 4-part limited edition podcast created to shed light on and draw the public's attention to the regional agreement on access to information, public participation, and justice in environmental matters in Latin America and the Caribbean, also known as the Escazú Agreement. Escazú is for You is hosted by CANARI Executive Director and Trinidad and Tobago Escazú Champion Nicole Lioto. Every part or episode of the series tackles a different yet equally critical aspect of the treaty and how it will impact upon Caribbean citizens' lives. For each chat, Nicole is joined by one or more of her colleagues and fellow Escazú champions from throughout the Caribbean. On this episode of Escazú is for You,
I kind of see Escazú Agreement as a means to empower people. So often in the Caribbean, we do not feel empowered. Things happen to us. We accept them as just, the par for course. This is how things are, and we don't feel that we have the power to change things. But the Escazú Agreement is telling everyone is that not only should you have the power, but you have the right.
episode number 3, Justice.
My name is Nicole Lioto. I'm Executive Director of the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute, or CANARI. Today I have two amazing guests with me, two ladies from Jamaica, Danielle Andrade-Goffe, representative of the public in the Escazú Agreement negotiations. So Danielle has really been intimately involved in the whole development of this treaty, and she's an attorney at law with Goffe Law in Jamaica. Ingrid Parchment is Executive Director of the Caribbean Coastal Area Management Foundation, or CCAM, which is a long-standing partner of CANARI and a partner on the Pisces project as well. We do a lot of work with them. They do excellent work in Jamaica on the ground. So welcome, Ingrid and Danielle. And so we're holding this chat series to really break down to you, to all of us. Escazú is for you. Escazú is for us. And so we need to understand what this means. And today we have a very interesting topic, third in our series, looking at justice in environmental matters. That's the third pillar of the agreement. Access to information, we talked about the first week. Participation in environmental decision-making. This week is justice in environmental matters. So I'm going to open up and ask Danielle to explain to us, give us a sense of what does that mean? What is justice in environmental matters? What are we talking about here?
Hi, good afternoon, Nicole. Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. So when we talk about justice in the context of the Escazú Agreement, what we're talking about is environmental justice. So we're talking about the right for every member of the public to have some avenue of redress. If, for example, there is some violation of some law that affects the environment, if there's some threat to the environment, and then also when we're looking at other rights that people enjoy. So the right to information, the right to be able to participate in decisions that affect them. If those rights have been breached, have been violated, what option do people have? They should have the right naturally to be able to challenge, to be able to appeal those breaches. And so access to justice is really saying, if something goes wrong or is about to go wrong, how do you ensure that people have the means, the method for redress? So it's also looking at things, it could be talking about an administrative or judicial system, because it's not just the courts that are able to give redress. Sometimes it might be a tribunal. We're also talking about the right for everybody to be treated fairly through the judicial process. So equal opportunities for those persons who, for example, may be in vulnerable situations, people who don't have the funds, are poor, don't have access to technical expertise. How do they access justice? And so when we talk about environmental justice, we're talking about really equal opportunities for everyone to have their day in court, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. To have a voice. That's excellent. So important in this region, of course. And Ingrid, I want to turn over to you, and I want to hear a little bit about what kind of work CCAM does, because I know you're very on the ground working with local communities and so on. And then, you know, in your opinion, in your world and who you work with in Jamaica, the stakeholders, why do you think access to justice in environmental matters is important for sustainable development?
CCAM is an environment and development organization, and we work primarily in the Portland Bight protected area. So our approach is co-management, because we don't feel that this is something that we're doing for ourselves or alone. So to be able to do the work that we do, we partner with government agencies, donors, community persons, from the discussion through implementation and for monitoring. Because really there's no better way to do the work that you do than having as many of those partners on board, all of the stakeholders getting their feedback and input. At the end of the day, you will have a richer, better project. Persons will understand the reasons why, and they'll get an opportunity to say how things should be done. And if you go back to the whole matter of climate justice, if it's not done in a particular way, how would they get information on the challenges? How would they be able to get redress? All that kind of thing. That co-management approach is what helps us to make sure that that can happen as far as the law allows. But the law doesn't allow it, then you can only take it so far. You know, some of the things that we also do is that we patrol in our area. There are 3 fish sanctuaries, and these are no-take areas. So you cannot fish in these areas. So we had a whole process of consultation with stakeholders prior to them being established. And then we have put in marker buoys, and we have teams that go out and patrol these areas. But then there are other persons who want to go into those areas and poach. So just recently, actually, 2 persons within our sanctuary were taken to court by the Marine Police. But we had to make sure that persons knew about the regulations surrounding the fish sanctuary, so that if they breach those sanctuaries, they would know what could happen. And so they were taken to court. They can be charged up to 3 million Jamaican dollars. These 2 persons were charged $50,000 each, given a month within which to pay, and they paid. But that particular information about them being taken to court and that whole process, it is only because that information was shared directly to me from a representative of the Marine Police, where I'm aware of it. So again, that other bit of, even on the other side, when anything happens, how do you make people know that this is what is happening, and also that therefore that the law is actually working? You know what I'm saying? So on the other hand, the redress is important, but even just to know that there are these things that are in place, they're being enforced, they're being monitored, this is what is happening. And from our perspective, one of the things that we had discussed was perhaps utilizing social media or adding a newspaper if we had something, whether it went right or wrong, that we want to publicize that so we can afford that level of transparency to be accountable for what it is that we're doing in the area. So that's some of what it is that we're doing.
Yeah. No, so that's a very nice example, very practical of what that looks like, really trying to ensure that environmental laws and regulations are respected. I know that Jamaica really has had a lot of experience with looking at environmental matters and seeking justice and in the courts and so on. I don't know if there are other practical examples that you could share that would help people understand what this could look like. What does environmental justice really look like in a practical way?
I think my best example, which perhaps many people will be familiar with, is the whole matter of the development of the Goat Island. And Daniel will catch me up on the year, because as we get older, we forget the years of things, right? The previous government went to China a few years ago and announced that there was going to be a port development at the Goat Islands. The Goat Islands are islands within the Portland Bight protected area, which is an area that was agreed by academia, general public, etc. And that was set up in 1998. That activities within that area must fall within what is allowable. So you have to go through a certain process for decisions to be made. Not saying that there can't be development, but it must be development which focuses on the best practices. We're looking at best use, we're looking at sustainable development, and we're looking at things that will not harm the environment or the persons that operate within. Obviously, prior to the creation of the protected area, they would have had some operations like sugarcane production and the operations of a bauxite company. We did not take those outside. We said, these things are natural things that happen. How can we ensure that they do it to whatever the law allows, right? So the government made that decision. And so, of course, that was of concern to CCAM, to JET, to a number of organizations and persons in Jamaica and around the world, actually. So we all, with our different persons that we appeal to, we decided to come together and have a discussion about how it is that we would approach this. Everybody had a different pot of funds or no funds, but had access to persons, etc. But the basic thing for there, I think, is that we work together to make a decision about how we were going to be going forward. In our particular case, we did an economic valuation of where a port within or outside of Portland Bay, but in Jamaica, what would be the cost of developing that port and operating that port based on the information that we had received from, through the process of them doing the development. Even being able to, I have to backstep, even to get that information about what was being proposed was difficult. They only gave us a smattering. We couldn't get it from anywhere. We didn't do an ATI, Danielle, so yes. But I believe JET might have done that.
What is an ATI?
Sorry, there's an access to information process, sorry. We didn't go through that process, but based on the information that they put out, we use that information. And with funding from the Critical Ecosystems Partnership Fund, we were able to hire experts from Conservation International, as well as a port expert from out of the UK, to put together a study on, as I said, the economic valuation. We decided not to take the typical environment route because we had already been turned down about Goat Island is not important because it only has 2 little lizards, or in Jamaican terminology, 2 little lizards, and therefore of no great value. So we decided, okay, let's hit you in the pocket. If that's what you understand, let us look at it. And we provided alternate sites which were much less expensive to develop and to operate, but that would have the similar, you get employment, you would still be able to get your goods in and out, etc. And we thought that was a good thing. To be able to do the publicity around that, we had 60 copies made. And on the day when I went to Parliament, we had a copy given to every parliamentarian in Parliament. On that same day, we had a national launch. So we had a press conference. We invited persons to come, and they were able to talk to us, hear about the report. We were also, for the first time, I think, in an environmental matter, and I stand corrected on that, but in my memory, we were on the nightly news on both our local TV stations. We were on about 8 of the radio stations being interviewed. We were interviewed on morning programs. We went to fora, and I say we, so this is not the CCAM and its partners. We were on radio. We went to a forum held by the University of Technology, University of the West Indies, other entities. Everybody wanted to hear about it. People are doing social media campaigns around why it was important for them to save the Goat Islands. For CCAM, it was important to save the Goat Islands, but also to keep it in people's mind that the Goat Islands is within the Portland Bay protected area. And as such, we felt that if we allow them to do this development, which would have totally disseminated the island, would have used a coal-fired plant for energy. Those are 2 big negatives. It would have changed the face of Portland, and that particular, it probably would have also made that community closest to the Goat Island much more vulnerable to storm surge, etc. We even went into a community, Portland Cottage community, so that people on the ground would have a say in how this is going on. So with support from JET, we were able to have that session so that they could review the documents, we could hear what they're saying, and they could have a part of it. Because at a technical level, we have some ideas, but we want to hear from the persons. We want to make sure that they understand on both sides. We said, this is what the developer is proposing. These are some of the things that we think good and bad that can happen from that. Because employment is always a good thing. That's a reality. And so when you're saying no to some development, you also have to figure out what are going to be the implications of that. So that was kind of the focus of that. The last thing we did actually was that the Prime Minister agreed to come on a tour with us, and we took him out on a boat tour, and we had a long discussion about why we didn't think this was the best thing, among other issues as well. Obviously, you took the opportunity to look at other issues. And at the end of the day, he decided not to go with it. And I feel that it is our collective efforts at the community level, the media, the international press, the international NGOs, groupings, regional persons, why this was successful and why the persons in the community understood their role and what the impact would have had on their lives. Because if people didn't feel that it affected them, if they didn't buy into this, if they were not interested in it as a positive or negative, I don't think we would have gone anywhere with it. So I think that's one of the most significant campaigns that we've been involved in.
Certainly. Thank you, Ingrid. And I remember this very well. You're right. It was not a Jamaican issue. Around the region and globally, people were looking at this. So that story, I think, was really powerful. Danielle, you're a lawyer, have been working on environmental justice issues for many years. Including with JET is the Jamaica Environment Trust, which has been working on environmental justice issues in Jamaica. Danielle, break that case down first. Break it down and explain why that is such a good example of environmental justice. Explain it to us.
All right. So there's several, I think, features of this particular case study that I think are relevant. So at the same time that CCAM and Ingrid were partnering with others to do certain aspects of the campaign, the Jamaica Environment Trust, which is another environmental NGO, they had actually made some requests for information about the port. Anybody who has tried to use the Access to Information Act in Jamaica may be well aware of some of the issues, but I'll talk about what is relevant for this particular case study. So they were made requests for information, which to me is the most benign, most simple way of exercising your democratic right to participate, to get information, to know what's happening, and were refused. We asked for information about the project, information about the contracts that had already been signed between government agencies and the proposed port developer. We were denied that information for various reasons, such as information being confidential and not subject to disclosure. When that request for information was challenged, because we have a tribunal that hears appeals, what the government did was to exercise their discretion under the Act to issue a certificate of exemption. And what a certificate of exemption does, it means that it deprives you of your ability to get the information, to challenge the refusal at the appeal stage. It's almost like they're saying the government has decided this thing is exempt completely, absolutely, you cannot appeal it. And they did that. When I think they issued 3 actual certificates of exemption, because throughout the process and the back and forth thing, JET was able to highlight certain deficiencies in the certificates that were issued. So every time a deficiency was highlighted, another certificate was issued to correct that deficiency. And they did it, I think, 3 times. JET, because we were deprived of an avenue to appeal to the tribunal, appealed to the Supreme Court, and they through a process called judicial review. To me, I think this highlights some of the issues that we have in the Caribbean.
Ingrid, the plot thickens with this story. So in parallel to what you were talking about that was going on with stakeholders on the ground, raising awareness, doing the economic valuation study, coming up with solutions, with options. In parallel, there was this work using the legal system to try and access information by the Jamaica Environment Trust. I'm really interested to know whether, the stakeholders you were working with, in particular the local communities, were they seeing this as a justice issue? We have a right to a healthy environment. We have a right to be part of this decision making, even as all these legal bits were going on.
I think they definitely saw it as them having a right to be a part of the decision making. I don't know if and access to information, because I think that aspect of it, them not getting the information. Some people said, but the government went ahead and did this and they didn't even talk to us before, and they're still not talking to us now. And there are other things that have happened before. There was dredging that created flooding, other things they feel, and they're saying, but why don't they talk to us? Maybe we have an idea. Maybe it could be different. Maybe so people are very concerned about information and their right to information, their ability to be able to participate in a discussion. And so I think our bringing it to them, and we even brought some persons into Kingston as well, and to different meetings. I think in collaboration with JET, there was an on-the-air meeting in Old Harbour Bay as well. And persons got an opportunity there to talk. But their feeling was this was not the government coming to them. This was their usual people that they're dealing with. They're used to seeing me and the jet people. So yes, we are there. So we are defending their rights. But what about the government to come and say to them, this is what we're thinking of doing. What do you think about? Because, the Goat Island, for the persons in Old Harbor Bay, this is an area that they go to for weekend activity. You take your family over there and, you go swimming. And it's an area near the Galleon Harbor Fish Sanctuaries right around it. And that is a no-take zone, so they're fishing just outside of the area, and it's a beautiful site. So they're saying, how could you have made a decision about having people coming in here and changing my life? And so persons were even concerned about whether when they are trying to break down the island, thinking was that they might have to level the island. Would that create pollution? Would that create challenges elsewhere? And they're saying, why aren't you talking to us? How could you have made, these were some straight questions that people asked, and they felt that they were not getting the answers, which is kind of why we stepped in to try and provide kind of like a bridge. But even providing a bridge, we did not have all of the information. As Danielle continues, getting access to was also difficult.
Danielle, yes, let's pick back up that story where you were with the challenge of getting access to information in the first place. Then what happened? How was justice? Yeah.
Right. I was talking about to imagine that this were not, for example, an environmental NGO such as JET that was taking the matter, but let us imagine that it was one of the community persons, one of the fishermen who said, but I don't want this to happen. And how do I prevent this from happening? How do I see whether how can this thing be legal? Can a court tell me, And some of the barriers I think that people would experience, the first is costs. How do I hire a lawyer? In Jamaica, legal aid is not provided for civil matters. It's not operational, that provision in our legislation. And so there's no legal aid mechanism for persons who have environmental law cases. What we do have is a public defender. So if it's a constitutional case, the public defender can assist. And again, that is determined by the public defender's discretion, budget, and so on. The second thing is how to know where to begin. What the procedures entail? Where do I start? How do I even begin to know what my rights are? That is another barrier that people face. For many people, the judicial system is just something that is, it's not something many people are afraid with. It's not something that people have familiarity with. And it can be intimidating because you don't know what your rights are and how to navigate the procedures. And that's where the lawyers come in and the expense. The other issues that people have to deal with when they're talking about barriers is even to produce the level of evidence to prove your case. How do I, as a fisherman, say to you that, boy, I know that development is going to have disastrous environmental impacts, and here's my scientific proof. How do we get that proof to show that? And oftentimes in these types of cases, there's unequal bargaining power between the parties. The person who is challenging the environment and challenging the action to say it is harming my right to a healthy environment or my public health often doesn't have access to the same resources as the developer who is there interested in doing the development. They have access to the big firms, access to the technical experts that can provide evidence. And so you have this very unequal situation in our judicial system when it comes to justice. And what the Escazú Agreement is saying is that we recognize that these barriers exist and there's issues, and the governments need to have responsibility to have it as a duty to ensure that they remove these barriers as much as possible. So for those people who are in vulnerable situations because they're poor or for other reasons, you need to ensure that they have access to legal and technical assistance. You need to ensure that you publicize what the rights and procedures are for access to justice so everybody knows. In the case, for example, of costs, it can't be prohibitively expensive. And then the part that I also like that the Escazú Agreement addresses is the issue of who can challenge a development. And this is something that I think is very relevant when we're talking about environment in the Caribbean context, when we're a small island developing states. Oftentimes our natural resources are important national assets, our beaches, our protected areas. You know, it's not just for the communities that live in and around it and are very directly dependent on it. They're seen as very important for us, you know, as a community, as a nation. And traditionally, in our legal system, the traditional view has been only those people who are directly affected have the right to challenge an action that affects the environment. And what the Escazú Agreement is saying that no, you need to make this broader. You need to ensure that as far as possible, those people who are eligible for challenging these actions, that you extend it and it's interpreted in its broadest sense. So for example, if you have an environmental NGO who may have expertise in the subject matter of the area, if you have an academic, for example, who has done research in that area, if you have, you know, there are various examples, even if it's of national importance. What Escazú is saying is that you need to ensure that there are a greater number than just those who are directly affected who have the opportunity to challenge those decisions.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So then, you know, break that down in a practical sense. Let's say for this case study, you know, what are some of the things, what would this have looked like if we had Escazú Agreement in place? What are some of the ways that Escazú Agreement and some of the things you just talked about could have contributed to that case? What are some of the things that might have been different?
You know, it's hard to say what might have been different. It's easier to say what we were able to do because of the position that Jet was in. So we had 3 lawyers working on the case.
Wow.
And typically environmental cases, because of the nature of the issues involved, they're often very technical. Sometimes they have to do, they're involved environmental studies where you're trying to prove a harm that is likely to occur. It can become burdensome and unwieldy in terms of the amount of evidence you have to amass, the arguments that you have to make. In our case, we were lucky to have access to environmental legal persons, experts to assist us with that. The average person would not have that. And that's because you were saying, you need to ensure people have access to legal assistance. The other thing we had access to were scientists who were interested in assisting us, who we had partnered with on many different issues. And so they were able to provide us with assistance in the case free of cost. So the other issue of costs, and this is something, it didn't come up in the access to information aspect of it, but we were also prepared, if a permit were granted, we were prepared to challenge that permit. And I think this is probably something that resonates with most people, where you hear about something happening in a project and you want to know how to stop it. When we talk about that, we're really talking about being able to get what we call an order for an injunction, which is like an order from the courts to prevent the activity from happening. And it's usually or generally the case that if you want to get something such as that, an injunction, you have to prove that not only do you have a very good case, but you also have to give an undertaking for damages or security for costs. In other words, you have to be able to show that financially, if it is that this court grants injunction and you are wrong, you lose your case at the end of the day, you are able to compensate that developer for the economic loss they suffered because of your injunction that stopped them from being able to implement their project. No, we're talking about millions of dollars. In many cases, billions, maybe in some. There was a case that Jamaica Environment Trust took, which we didn't request an injunction because of the fear of having to give an undertaking for damages. And it was for a large-scale hotel development. And while the court case was ensuing, the hoteliers continued building because they didn't care. As far as they were concerned, the court didn't tell them to stop. Couldn't afford to ask the court to do that. And so even though Jet won it at first instance, won the judgment, at the time when they won, so much damage had already been done to the environment. The hotel had already been in the process of being constructed. If Escazú was being implemented, if Jamaica was a party to Escazú and it was being implemented at a point in time, Jet could have been able to ask for an undertaking for damages, and Jet should have been able to say to the court, I don't have to give an undertaking for cost because this is a matter of public interest, and therefore I shouldn't have to do so. So that is just to give you an example of how Escazú can really change and modify the way in which people are able to access the courts and get justice.
It's shocking, the power and the resources that are so important and can limit people to access justice, which is a basic human right. You know, I mean, the Escazú Agreement recognizes a human right is a right to a healthy environment, you know, and as you said, these are our natural heritage. And, you know, what I'm really getting from you is the importance of the Escazú Agreement in leveling that playing field. So even people who are not fancy lawyers or have access to fancy lawyers, who don't have a lot of money or maybe scientific knowledge or whatever, can still feel that they have a right to say, you know, I want my environment protected. I want to be part of this environmental decision. And if something goes wrong, I want to see that fixed. You know, I want to see some redress. I want to see the environment restored to whatever extent it could be, you know. But yeah, so this is so critical for basic human rights of citizens and residents in the Caribbean. We're getting some very interesting questions from Emma. Jamaica signed but did not ratify the Escazú Agreement. What happened and why? So this is it's a two-step process where countries can sign and, you know, go ahead in their deliberations and then make the final commitment to ratify. You know, yes, they will become a party to this treaty when it comes into force. Danielle, is the public aware of what's happening in terms of Jamaica?
All right, great. Jamaica had signed the Escazú Agreement. Okay, so my understanding is that the cabinet had approved Jamaica signing the Escazú Agreement. They did not approve the ratification. I think there was some miscommunication that occurred with the various ministries involved in the process, and it led to an instrument of ratification being deposited and having had that to be withdrawn. But the real position, or the true position, is that the cabinet had approved the signing of it, not the ratification. And what they had indicated is that there were two things that were necessary before Jamaica would ratify the agreement. One, they wanted to ensure that the public was more aware about what Escazú Agreement was. So they wanted to do more public outreach on the Escazú Agreement before they took the decision to ratify it. And the second thing that they indicated was important was also to take an assessment of the legal framework and whatever reforms were necessary to ensure that that was being pursued. So they wanted to ensure, for instance, that when they ratified it, they were, I suppose, in a position of compliance or near compliance or en route to compliance with what the Escazú Agreement required governments to do or to have in place. But with CCAM and with Canary, we're working on projects to engage the government in useful dialogue and to see how we can ensure that those barriers, those obstacles to Jamaica ratifying, that we address them. So how do we get more public outreach out there, for example? We're also assessing Jamaica's legal framework and producing a report to show what are the areas and recommendations that we need to reform in order to ensure that Jamaica's laws or legal system is aligned to what is required by the Escazú Agreement. So we're hoping that's being implemented, and we're hoping that through that project and other efforts being made, that we can, hopefully Jamaica will ratify before the end of 2021.
Fingers crossed, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Emma, Jamaica still has time. You know, it's a very good question. And we're looking forward to Jamaica making that final commitment and ratifying. And certainly we are. Yes, Danielle.
Sorry, I just wanted to just a correction in the terms, the words used. So because 11 persons have ratified the Escazú Agreement to date, and that was the threshold in order for it to enter into force. Once it entered into force, the process is not called ratification, it's called accession. So it's really the same thing in a sense, it's just terminology is a bit different.
Thank you.
But we can still become a party after it enters into force.
A second question from Emma. I'm trying to understand environmental justice. So this is another case. Would environmental justice include communities or individuals whose home has sewage running through it from flooding, etc. We see these stories on TV news every day, not a big environmental campaign. How would the Escazú Agreement help? So this is an issue. I don't know if there's flooding in Jamaica and the floodwaters have sewage in them. Yeah, that's an issue in Trinidad as well. So the Escazú Agreement can apply to any environmental issue, am I correct?
So in terms of access to justice, there are, in essence, 3 scenarios in which the Escazú Agreement says that you should have access to justice. One, if there is a decision or omission or action in relation to your right to information. Second, if it concerns your right to public participation. And thirdly, if there is a violation of environmental laws or threat to the environment. And so I do believe that the issue or the scenario that Emma is talking about, which I'm glad she raised this, because we've been having serious issues with flooding, as well as not just caused by natural disasters, but as she pointed out, there are several communities who have sewage running through it. Those persons whose responsibility it is to manage those sewage treatment plants have a duty to ensure that their sewage treatment plant does not threaten in any way or harm the environment or people's public health. So they need to operate it in a manner in which to prevent that. Jet actually brought a case where we had to bring a government agency to court for a similar issue. They were managing a sewage treatment plant, but for 30 years it had basically been abandoned and raw sewage was flowing along the coastline behind the community and causing significant public health risks and hazards to them. And this was over a period of 30 years, so you can imagine. And we took them to case for their failure to perform their duty. And that is an aspect of law that I think is open to everybody, and that is not really utilized as much. We call it judicial review, but in essence, it says that if a public authority has a duty and responsibility, they need to perform it in the legal way in which they perform it. And if they don't, then you as a citizen has a right to challenge that. And so we brought that court case. We used the Access to Information Act. We were able to discover that the government agency operating that plant had actually been charging a tax to collect money in order to fix the plant for many, many years and had not been doing it. And so that information came out, was used to challenge the argument that we don't have money, we don't have the resources to fix it. And we were able to use that information to counter that argument. And they agreed to a consent order, which was endorsed by the court, where they would fix the sewage treatment plant. And that sewage treatment plant was fixed. It's working great. It's one of the best now that we have in Jamaica. What I would say to Emma is that those communities or individuals who have the sewage flowing through their communities, they have a right to a healthy environment, and in addition to that, if that sewage is being operated by a public authority, they have a right to challenge that public authority's duty or failure to operate the sewage treatment plant. Even if it's operated by a private entity, there are government agencies that have a duty to prevent these things from happening, to enforce the laws, to prevent those things. So even then, you can also challenge those public authorities for failing to prevent those things from happening, or taking action, if that is happening.
Yeah. And I would assume other issues like what's causing the flooding in the first place. So at least in the Trinidad and Tobago context, deforestation of our hills, and so degradation of our watersheds. So there's flash flooding. Rain is just running off. Our drains and rivers are full of plastic pollution. Or at under capacity. So I think it's really untangling the root causes of the environmental issues that are either destroying biodiversity, the natural environment, affecting human health, affecting livelihoods, like in the case in Goat Islands. So it's really untangling that, and giving people a voice in justice to address these issues. Emma, thanks for those. I'm going to come back to your last one, but I want to bring Ingrid back into the conversation. Danielle, you talked about the campaign now, trying to talk to the Jamaican public to raise awareness about the Escazú Agreement. And Ingrid, I wanted to ask you just a little bit. You could just share, how is that going? You know, are people responding well?
So as was mentioned before, CCAM is working with Canary and World Resources Institute to help women to move towards this process of ascension. Yes.
Accession.
It's not accession. It started with ratification, but thankfully others are on board as well, so fine. So what we have had is that we have a social media campaign, and we actually had a consultant to help us to put that campaign together. And so that is, especially with COVID, a lot of what we're going to be doing will have to be online.
Yeah.
So we have that campaign which has started. We have put out two videos, I think, and we have another video coming up with Danielle, and I think we're putting a fisherman and some other local persons on that. The idea is to have a workshop with the government agencies to look at the legal reform document, which Danielle mentioned earlier. But we want this to be a continuous and ongoing thing, even beyond the government coming fully on board, because persons have to know what their rights are. So if we even have this new agreement and we say clap, 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 persons still need to understand how this can change their life. I mean, Danielle talked a lot about taking matters to court, and I think CCAM is a fairly large NGO. We cannot afford to take matters to court. We cannot afford to hire the attorneys. We don't have the time to gather the evidence. So, you know, even no matter what level they're at, going through the court, you have to have the funding and the human resources to be able to do that. But having an agreement, an environmental document, legislation that says you have the right to do it is even more critical, and therefore anybody can bring it. It could be a group of community persons. You could appeal, you know, if you can't do it as an individual, that's important. And also not having, because we had thought of a couple of cases before, and that matter of having to have the money in case you had to pay was a huge detractor from us to do that. And I kind of feel that, you know, that is kind of putting something in play to almost prevent you. And as you say, having the developer continue to work while the decision is being made is a huge thing, you know.
So people are looking forward to the videos and the social media campaign, I'm sure.
Oh yes, I mean, we've had, you know, with Instagram, there have been lots of persons. We're on Twitter as well. We're on Facebook. We're getting a lot of whatever the social media people call all of those, and please don't. But we have a lot of persons coming on. For the first one, I think on Twitter, there were 22,000.
Wow.
You know,
engagements and likes and shares and
and, you know, more people are sharing. The sharing is also so critical when people see it and really understand what it's about and want to share it. That is even more critical. We really would have liked to have had some face-to-face sessions where we could interact more with persons. But as I said, going forward, you know, we might decide to do a small webinar or something where we can reach out to people.
Excellent.
Encourage persons to go on our various sites and see and share and share this with your various networks so that we can continue the discussion. We are also having discussions with the Principal Director of the Climate Change Division, senior technical persons in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, and we're looking for some other government persons that we will be having discussions with, persons with climate change responsibility, NEPA, etc., whether on a one-to-one. We're also doing surveys among civil society, because what we want to find out from them, how are you participating? How are you included in climate actions within Jamaica? Do you know what meetings? Are you on a list? Can you just go in and say, okay, I want to go to COP? How does that work? So we want persons to know what are the local meetings, what are the regional meetings that are happening? How do you know about them? Are you aware of them? Have you ever tried to participate and not been able to participate? Do you know the information? Do you know what's on the climate agenda? You know, we think that information is important and want to provide that information back to those government agencies so they can see what persons have said, and hopefully it can help them to refine how it is that they work. I think one of the big things I think I've learned from what we have done so far is that there are not as many people being engaged in this whole climate action as I thought. Not other NGOs, not other CBOs, much less the general public. And so I think if we want to make a difference, and I think the Escazú will allow persons to think about it differently, but I go back and say they have to know about it before they're able to utilize and help us to implement it properly. So I think this public awareness and information sharing is a critical thing, but we need partners on board to help us to do that.
Yeah. What you all are doing sounds fantastic. We only have a few more minutes. Danielle, I want to answer Emma's last question. And I said, right to a healthy environment is in the Jamaican Charter of Rights. Am I correct?
Yes, that was easy.
Good, that was easy. Thank you, Emma. Vicky from Trinidad and Tobago is just sharing information. ClientEarth.org is one of the world's most ambitious environmental organizations who work in partnership, using the law to protect life on Earth. And Vicky is a lawyer and really a dedicated advocate for sustainable development working here in Trinidad and Tobago. And she runs the Green Market, if anybody's interested as well. And so I think, the other story I got from Ingrid and Danielle was the importance of us collaborating, different civil society organizations collaborating with government partners as well. Escazú Agreement is such a foundational agreement for good environmental management, good environmental governance in the region, putting people at the center of the environment, recognizing our right to a healthy environment, recognizing the importance of the environment for lives, livelihoods, well-being, economy. Before I do my little wrap-up, I want to give the last word again. Any closing thoughts? First, I say from Danielle and then Ingrid.
I kind of see Escazú Agreement as a means to empower people. And I think that so often in the Caribbean, we do not feel empowered. Things happen to us. We accept them as just, the par for course, this is how things are, and we don't feel that we have the power to change things. And I think that the Escazú Agreement is telling everyone is that not only should you have the power, but you have the right. And I think that it will bring about a cultural shift. It will make people more bolder, more courageous to stand up for their rights, for things that affect them. But I would love to see, if we fast forward 20 years from now, is very active litigation in courts where people are not afraid, to challenge the system, to challenge the issues that affect them. That is what I would love to see. So I encourage everybody to learn more about the Escazú Agreement, encourage your governments to become a party to the process, because really and truly, this is about people power. As you say, Nicole, Escazú is for you.
Thank you very much, Danielle. Ingrid, any closing words?
I almost feel like Danielle said it so well. I had to find something to add. But I think I want to reiterate, Escazú is for us. But we need to make sure we understand what the agreement says. Mm-hmm. And I encourage persons, as I said, to go on our social media sites. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and it's all Caribbean Coastal Area Management Foundation, or CCAM, and learn more. Go online and read about the Escazú Agreement. Talk to your persons, your family, your co-workers, your community, your church people, your governments about it, why it is that it is important for us to move forward this process. This is one of those things that are for us. So we are the ones that need to push this so that we can get the benefit. And I say we, but it's really the country that's going to benefit in our various countries that are going to benefit in the end. We want to make sure, one of my fears when we came to the agreement that the Goat Island would not be developed was that, would that mean that there could be future hits for it to be developed? And also, would the government feel that, okay, so we've put aside Goat Island so we can go and destroy the other parts of the country? And that's a discussion for another time. However, I say it is for us. We need to be a party to it, inform ourselves, and keep on. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ingrid and Danielle. And as they said, Escazú is for you, it's for us. And it's so important that we all become environmental defenders. And we all feel, like Emma raised, any citizen, any community, any group, any organization has the right to a healthy environment, has the right to justice, has the right to access to environmental information, has the right to participate in decision making. If we need to use the courts, we use the courts. This is a whole new way of thinking, and we all need to become more confident and understand our rights. And this Escazú Agreement is, I think, a very important. What I want everyone to do is really do your homework, talk to people, And I want to remind everyone that we have a campaign running, another social media campaign called #IfWeHadEscazú, where what we're doing is just the stories that Ingrid and Danielle have shared from Jamaica. Everyone has their own story, their own passion about why we need to protect the environment. What issues are you concerned about? And we're asking people to share a photo, a little video clip you can take on your phone. It doesn't have to be fancy. Share it with Canary at the email address is communications@canary.org. And share your stories of why Escazú is important to you. If we had Escazú, #IfWeHadEscazú. And really all of this is part of building a movement in the Caribbean, promoting this agreement and promoting our access rights to environmental information, participation, and justice. I am going to sincerely thank Danielle and Ingrid for a fascinating chat. Thank you so much for sharing all of your experiences and wisdom with us. And Danielle is kindly coming back again, and our other guest will be Omar Mohammed from the Cropper Foundation. And they're going to start talking about what role we civil society organizations need to play in implementation of the Escazú Agreement. It's coming into force soon, and we need to be ready. We need to build our capacity and readiness.
On the next, Escazú is for you.
The existing participation mechanisms really depend on and result in a lot of this kind of silo thinking continuously. So even if something is a national development project, the consultations normally happen in whatever geographic, possibly remote community that the development's happening in. You know, that's something that we've realized now more than ever, that you can't just depend on having hard copies of these particular documents in sporadic little physical locations around the country.
The Escazú is for You team would like to thank our funder, the European Union, for their support of the Escazú is for You live chat series, this podcast, and the Pisces Project overall. To our special guests, Danielle Andrade-Goffe and Ingrid Parchment, for lending us their time and expertise on access to justice in environmental matters. To our live participating audience, for your thoughtful comments and questions on the Escazú Agreement and access to justice. Thank you.